We're at the Walker Arts Center for a dialogue with Steve McQueen. Tonight's program is titled Steve McQueen, Art and Cinema. We'll talk about his remarkable career as both an artist and a filmmaker. Steve McQueen began his career as a visual artist. In 1999, he was awarded the prestigious Turner Prize, Britain's highest honor for the visual arts. At that moment, he was part of a new generation of artists who were really forging a new kind of video installation, pushing filmmaking out of the cinema and into the gallery. Many of the projects he did at the time were multiple screen video installations or projections in which one became very aware of the reflections on the floor or the space around the screen. So the viewer became much more mobile, not seated in a stationary seat in the cinema as I am now, but really mobilized so that they would move from screen to screen and become a much more active participant in the experience of cinema. Subsequently, he actually reversed tack and returned to feature filmmaking, beginning with his feature film Hunger, about Bobby Sands and the IRA prison strikes in the Maze prison during the early 1980s. This won him wide acclaim and also really highlighted his interest in the body, in particular the brutal punishment to which the prisoners at the time were submitted. He continued this interest also working with the actor Michael Fassbender, who also appeared in Hunger, in Shame, a film about a sex addict in 1990s New York City. Subsequently, this year, he's now come out with his widely acclaimed feature film, 12 Years a Slave, about a history of slavery in North America, based on the life story of Samuel Northrop and his memoirs. This film is also one that continues to shock people and I think really realizes Steve's ambition to show the unknown, show repressed histories, really reveal things that are invisible within our society in a very direct and physical way. His cinema is one in which the body has a very central role, in which sound and sensation are as important as the visual image, so that it becomes a very sensorial and physical experience. Tonight we'll be discussing many of these ideas in his work and how he's really moved fluidly between the cinema and the gallery. I'm Stuart Comer, Chief Curator for Media and Performance Art at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And now let's go to our dialogue with Steve McQueen. Good evening, and thanks very much to Cheryl and Dean and Olga and the staff at the Walker for bringing us here. It's a huge honor for me to be here with Steve in a room which is very rare in museums like this. For most art museums, to take cinema seriously is a very rare thing, and to have a cinema as exceptional as this one is a very exciting thing. And to be in the company of an artist like this who has really demanded that we take both the gallery and the cinema much more seriously, and the connection between the two has become much more interesting in the years that he's been producing the incredible work that he has. So I hope we can really get into some of the ideas that happen on screen in Steve's work, but also talk a bit about the spaces in which those screens are situated and what that means to all of us, both physically, architecturally, politically. It's a very complicated recipe that Steve's presented us with, and it's really great to be here with him to draw this out a bit. From his earliest work in the early 1990s, I think two key things have happened to cinema. It's been submitted both to the internet and it's been submitted to the generation of artists of which Steve is a major leading figure, who were pioneering new modes of video installation, often using multiple screens, but most importantly, really taking the viewer much more seriously as an engaged spectator, somebody who was often mobilized, who wasn't necessarily stationary, as we all are in this room at the moment, but really moving from screen to screen. But then subsequently, he came full circle and has now returned to the cinema and has been making feature films, not least of which is 12 Years a Slave, which hopefully most of you have now seen in the past few weeks. But I wanted to start initially with an image from a video called Illuminaire from 2001. If you can bring up the first slide, please. And this is a fairly less well-known video, I would say. I hadn't seen it until Steve's retrospective, which opened a year ago at the Art Institute of Chicago and then went to the Schaulager in Basel. It was an exceptional exhibition. But this video really captured my imagination, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it ever since. And I see it as a real threshold, Steve, in your work between your earliest videos, which really were meant for the gallery and which were very much about you and your own body, and then the shift to these feature films in which you no longer appear except behind the camera. But there's something about the way that your body disappears, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the video was shot in a Paris hotel room just before an opening of your exhibition at Marion Goodman, and you were watching the television late at night, and there was footage from a documentary about a military action in Afghanistan. So the light that lights Steve's body is the light of violence. It's the light of atrocity and warfare in the Middle East. But the camera that you used to capture this was just a small tripod camera on top of the monitor. So you also began to think about webcams in the era of internet pornography and a lot of other things that I think play into your work, in particular Shame, a few years later. But could you talk a little bit maybe about this shift in your work from your early use of your own body into becoming a director and really directing action from actors, not just bodies in a more abstract sense?
Well, first of all, I was cheap. And I was reliable. I will always be there. It was just a case of urgency. It was a case of wanting to sort of be as direct as possible and being present. In a way, you could think of it as some kind of performance, in a way that one wanted to sort of not just sort of paint on the canvas, but be in the canvas as well. And it was just one of those things where I was just as a figure within a landscape. I just wanted to sort of experiment with that performing element as such. And with this piece, Luminaire, it was very strange. It was one of those situations where I was running out of time, and it's very classical in a way. The nude on the nude figure on the bed, and it's just one of those things where you think of Cézanne, things like that. I mean, what was interesting for me was obviously, if you hadn't realized that I'm black, hello, good evening, welcome, on these sort of white sheets, and it's just this whole contrast. And of course, what's making me visible is those images of violence reflected on the television. And it was just very. I was interested in the classical. I was interested in, of course, what you do in a hotel room on your own. I was interested in the sort of the political aspect of our presence as such, because as much as we're here through love, we're here through violence. I mean, it's just a fact. Our presence here, through war, through warfare, through immigration, through whatever, has led us to where we are sitting today, as well as love, of course. So those things I was sort of questioning and looking at.
Because I think there's this notion of 24-hour news and webcams and this kind of a camera whose eye never closes. It's constantly looking at us. But what's really interesting to me in this video is, unlike the later work where the visual register in which you're operating is so crystal clear and sharp. Mm-hmm. This is a low-grade image. This is what Hitosh Styrel, who's an artist in the exhibition 9 Artists Upstairs, calls the poor image. Yes. It's an image where the digital image is degrading and dissolving, and the body is being dissolved by this kind of digital light.
Well, yes, well, the camera is fighting to sort of make sense of the image. Because it's sort of, again, it goes black, it goes white, and there's sort of a polarization, there's a sort of flashes, explosions, gunfight, and what happens in warfare, of course, is reflected on my body through light. And the camera is struggling to sort of keep up. It's just one of those things, again, it is very painterly in a way. It is a certain situation of the figure and sort of pictorial sort of sense as such. And that whole idea was just very, and again, it is the nude on the bed. It's so classical, but of course with contemporary sort of splashes of color, of paint, which contemporary meaning the violence is making the image. So for me, that was fascinating. The brush strokes or the brush marks were through images of warfare as such.
I guess I also wanted to start with this particular image because it does sort of highlight the monitor in your work, and I think much of your earlier work was certainly invested in ideas that came out of artists like Bruce Nauman or Joan Jonas or Vito Acconci, who were not making cinema. They were really making video for the monitor. subsequently, you're obviously from a generation who expanded that into a larger dimension architecturally with larger projections. It was no longer a tube-based monitor, it was a projection. And now you've come back to rooms like this, to the cinema. So maybe just as we go along, it would be good to keep in mind, I think, how you use these different forms of cinema in your work, and how you, I think, really address the entire spectrum for the earliest kind of cinema, just a fascination with basic movement, and how that is constantly mediated by, I think, a really keen understanding of technology and what it does to us as bodies, as people, as political subjects. On which note, if you could just go to the next slide. This shot, too, I think is an interesting foreshadowing of the opening scene in Shame, in which Michael Fassbender is also on this, on the sheets, as it were. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And this is a billboard by Felix Gonzalez Torres, some of you might have seen. It's a very famous image that he took, which, as often in his work, it deals with absence, with doubling, with lost desire, and with a body that has disappeared. Felix was a very politically active artist. He was gay. Both he and his lover, who are somehow implicated in this image, both died of AIDS. And the way in which, Steve, your own body begins to disappear in a luminaire, I'm very interested in. And by the time later in this conversation we get on to 12 Years a Slave, I think we need to really think about the black body on screen and what you're doing with that, and what your fascination is with making the invisible things that have disappeared or remained unseen visible in the work.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because it reminds me very much of this James Baldwin novel, The Evidence of Things Not Seen. And of course, we see them here. These two men, unfortunately, are no longer here, but there's the evidence of their presence. It's kind of a shorthand, but we'll get to that point later.
Okay, we'll get there. If you could actually go to the next slide. And again, I think this is an early example in your work of this idea of absence and presence kind of performing each other. This is your own head kind of bobbing in and out of the frame just above my head from 1996.
Again, another Baldwin novel title. It's somewhere, this is somewhere in Devon, which I believe, and it's interesting. It was about, my head sort of bobs up and down as I come in and out of frame. The camera's low down. And it was a situation where it was sort of entering the frame, or such, the outsider as such, getting into the frame or out of the frame, whatever. It was just a sort of a struggle to sort of have this kind of appearance, this kind of visibility.
And how do you think, from these earlier videos, which, again, I don't know how many of you were able to see the retrospective at Schaulager or at the Art Institute of Chicago, but these three videos, which form a sort of trilogy, were shown really elegantly in a sort of triangular configuration. But again, from the beginning, you were really emphatically trying to make the viewer aware of their own body encountering your body on screen.
Yes, usually these images would be screened sort of floor to ceiling, side to side. So the whole back of the wall would be sort of engulfed with the image. There was no frame as such. And you'd walk into the space, which was about 7 meters long, 4 meters wide. So it was sort of all-encompassing, as in there was no escape. And there was this whole idea about something which was larger than you. In the cinema, obviously, you're sitting down comfortably, and with an art space, you could play with that in the sense of you're walking into a piece, you're standing up, and you can leave it at any time. But there's a sort of confrontation with the image, and I was interested in the whole idea of how you affect the image, or how the image affects you, as far as, say, these images had no sound, for example, so you became the soundtrack as such.
Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, 5 Easy Pieces, which is from around the same time. Again, I think you have this idea of sort of space, levitation, the body sort of almost not set free per se, but unleashed in a different kind of spatial configuration, both on the screen and, again, to the architectural situation that it's presented.
Yeah, 5 Easy Pieces, well, it was, again, it was a piece of 5 different, say, practices. One was these guys doing hula hooping. The other one was a woman doing a tightrope walk, but they had the camera right underneath her feet. As you press down, you see the feet come into frame, and it almost like it would drag the camera along as such. And there was other aspects, there was me actually, forgive me, pissing on the screen. And it was a lot to do with this. Just, it was, of course, there was some kind of exercises. What I mean by that was there was a tank which was the size of the actual camera frame. So forgive me, as I relieve myself, it was almost like I was on the audience as such, and this was fantastic patterns would occur. But it was all about this whole idea of investigating or experimenting with the camera, where you could put the camera, where's the right or wrong place to put the camera. There is none such thing, other than good or bad with how you sort of perceive a narrative or perceive some kind of dialogue as such.
But I think there was this really strong interest in carving out a more prismatic experience where, the perspectives are aerial points of view. Again, with the piss scene, you have this constant awareness of these different surfaces, different heights,
yes, different
situations sort of colliding and coming together.
But you as an audience, of course, again, it's one of those things which I wanted to do. It's almost like a punk rock, when people, forgive me, spit on the audience. There was a sort of gratification. Oh, thank you, he spat on me, fantastic. But at the same, there was just pushing those, because I would spit as you do when you pee as a man. Guys, But moving on. Why, we don't know. Next. Habit, bad one.
All right, next slide, please.
Okay.
And this is Bear from 1993, which is also, like Illuminaire, one of my very favorite works of yours. But again, this is you featured very prominently on the screen in this pas de deux with another naked black male body. Mm-hmm. You circle around each other, you kind of test each other out. It's very sexual, it's very homoerotic, but it also seems very unresolved. You're not exactly sure what this is leading to, but there's a constant sense of negotiating each other and trying to understand some kind of community, some sort of connection.
Yeah, at the time, in the early 90s, the most exciting thing for cinema for me was queer cinema at the time. It was the most exciting sort of, it was cinema, it was film being used in a way which was trying to say something in a way. It was almost like, I imagine if you go back to the 60s and think of Godard or Truffaut or whatever, for me, it was that kind of real kind of not experimenting, but there was a reason why to use a camera as such. And not that I was trying to mimic that at all, far from it, but I was definitely, I would say, influenced by that sort of experimental narrative approach. And it was just one of those sort of wonderful, it was one of the most important times of my life as far as being, wanting to sort of make work, wanting to be an artist at that time.
Two of the filmmakers within that generation that we've discussed before were Todd Haynes and Derek Jarman.
Yes.
And I don't remember if I mentioned this to you, but there's another wonderful black British filmmaker named John Akomfra, who we might maybe get onto in a little bit later in the conversation. But John had told me a story about he would occasionally show Derek Jarman films to all black audiences in Brixton, all black male audiences in Brixton, which were perceived as largely homophobic. And then he would show Derek's films, and there would be an initial kind of uproar, and then he would really bring them to his side, and they would have a very deeply political discussion about what these films meant. And I guess I would like to ask, where does your interest lie in that sort of political approach to cinema?
I think it's everything. I think even falling in love is political. I don't think it is that you can actually negotiate your way out of it at all in any way. So it's sort of, it goes hand in hand. I don't think again, it's even a cup of tea is political. Tea comes from, where does tea come from? Where does sugar come from? And in the day in England, the sugar from the West Indies, tea from India, it was colonial. It was, so it's the most simplest thing, quite loaded.
Yeah. And how did you feel in terms of connecting this body of work we've just looked at to artists like Naumann or Dan Graham or Von Rainer, that earlier generation who were largely all white? How important was it to you to have the black body as a major central?
Well, it wasn't, again, I don't really see myself as a black body. I'm a geezer, a bloke, I don't really walk down the street thinking, I'm a black person. So no, it becomes a situation of more to, as far as Naumann or Dan Graham is concerned, there's definitely a starting point. But my work from day one was always cinematic. I was always interested in cinema rather than illustration. I was interested in filmmaking as such. And I think there lies the difference as far as that their work was very illustrative, very formal to some extent. I think what I was interested in. At the same time, I'm looking at sort of Quism and Godard and whatnot. Yes, I'm looking at
Jean Vigo.
Jean Vigo, exactly, Jean Vigo, for sure. And those kind of artists, filmmakers rather, artists, filmmakers, artists, whatever. It's kind of it was a kind of a mash. It was more of how can you push this particular medium within a certain kind of interesting context. And Jarman is actually one of the few who actually was an artist who was a filmmaker, but also he was an interesting theatre designer. So there was a lot of interesting sort of collage or I don't know, whatever you call it. There was a kind of a mixing of styles as such.
I'm also curious, in London, at Goldsmiths,
yes.
in the 90s.
Yeah. Context, yeah.
And in the context of the Turner Prize, which you won in '99. Suddenly there's this explosion of artists in Britain. You, Douglas Gordon, Jane and Louise Wilson, etc., all working in video, and often in multiple screen video. Where did that come from?
I think it came a lot from a frustration that we couldn't make feature films. I'll be honest with you. I think we're very poor. We don't have really an industry. I think there was always this ambition, I think, that people, even if it was in the art context, that there was all this cinema, was a huge, want, but it was so far away from us. By the time I left Goldsmiths and grad film, I applied to NYU and I got in, but I was only there for 3 months because I hated it. So I came back to England to do art. I just think that has a lot to do with it. Actually, I've actually thought of that in a way. I think that had a lot to do with it. And again, there was a real kind of there were possibilities in art which there were not in cinema. We couldn't go out at 22, 21, 23 years old and make feature films, but we could go out and make artworks and be ambitious within that context. I think that was one of the reasons.
More than a few people have compared you to Jarman in the sense that you have turned the film industry on its ear. You've introduced a completely different kind of language into industrial commercial filmmaking. And he was always playing this dance around the underground, the British Film Institute, kind of playing between the official institutions and something a bit more independent and more experimental. Do you feel there's a resonance between what you were doing and what he's doing?
With Jarman? Yeah, no. And I think it is because I was so much more interested in story, narrative. I think Jarman was always the experimental artist, Derek Jarman, who was a gay filmmaker, an amazing gay filmmaker who was. He wasn't just a gay filmmaker. I'd label him like that. But he was one of our foremost filmmakers in Britain, and I think that he was more interested within the sort of. Again, it's Jack Goldstein in a way, and he was more like a I would say a Matthew Barney person within the context of the narrative wasn't, straightforward narrative filmmaking wasn't his interest. And I'm not saying that it's mine, but what I produced, the three films I produced, are much more in a traditional sense of storytelling.
Something else I've been curious about for a long time is, your career kind of coincides, parallels a situation in Britain which becomes increasingly commercial, increasingly, if Bear is 93, 7 years later Tate Modern opens, White Cube is in high gear, selling Damien Hirst and those kinds of artists. But there are other precedents for your work that really have nothing to do with that, in particular John Akomfra and the Black Audio Film Collective, or to some extent even, I would say, the London Filmmakers Co-op and earlier British structuralist cinema, which, like you, I think was very invested in the politics architecturally of the cinematic space.
Interesting. I'm just put with context in England, Britain, film was always seen to some extent as political. I won't say the majority, because there was the people who obviously want to make, but a lot of film art particularly film was seen as a political tool to experiment with and to sort of push forward. And for me, yes, I come from that tradition. Absolutely, I'm cut from that cloth. Absolutely, but for me, I don't know. At the same time, I always, what did I want? I always at the same time wanted to tell stories. I think not to say that stories forbid you from doing what those guys were doing, but we never had money. We never had any money. We never. I mean, I was at London Film Co-op. My God, it was like freezing cold. There was like six soups. Freezing. It was so cold. It was like electric heater. And then there was a woman just telling you how to sort of how to load a Super 8 Bolex and stuff. And you're free to that. 10 of you paid your £10 to be there. And it was that was Britain in those days. It was horrible. It really was.
Can you show the next slide, please? So this is from Drum Roll, and we can only show a single frame here, but it's actually a 3-screen video installation. But in terms of storytelling, I mean, in these kinds of videos, I think, again, you're referencing slapstick and very early 20th century modes of filmmaking, and kind of leading on into the idea of a narrative or a story.
Sort of. I mean, I'll explain, because unfortunately I don't like to show my images unless they're not in the right particular context, so I apologize for that, but I will explain what's going on here, because what's going on here is upside down, you'd be saying. But what's happening is that what happened with this piece called Drum Roll, and I was just interested in as being as economical as I can with a film about movement. And I thought, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll get an oil drum, the whole idea of an oil drum and movement and, gas. But all I'll do is I'll put holes in the axis, I'll turn it on its side, put a hole in the axis here, and one in the middle, as such, of the drum. And I just rolled this oil drum around my gallery on I think 57th and 5th Avenue. And it was a bit of a palaver. I was wearing this pink coat. Why? I don't know. I had one, and I was rolling this thing around because I love the idea of the economic of movement and filming it, and it became this sort of the rolling of, again, at that time it was tape, so everything was rolling. The tape was rolling, the drum was rolling, everything was moving. I just love the idea of this sort of trilogy. Not diptych, I'm going mad. This sort of idea of a triptych, excuse me, of this triptych, which was sort of just about movement, and that's what I did. That's what I did.
But in videos like this and in Deadpan, which we don't have a still for, but there is sort of an implicit violence, but then there's also a degree of humor that maybe softens the violence a little bit.
Sure. I was looking at the Searchers the other day, feature film. It was interesting because I was just thinking, my God, they're killing these Indians. The Indians are trying to kill them. They're burning, terrible raping people and stuff in the Searchers. But it's always John Ford always undercuts it with humor. Out of nowhere, in the most horrendous situations, there's this thing called humor. I have to learn that. But it was quite wonderful. Anyway, moving on. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Okay.
Next.
So, the more recent films, maybe the humor has subsided a bit.
Yes.
And on that note, let's have the first clip, please, from Hunger. So, going from this early work, which was so thoughtfully about bodies and the relationships between them, and really using the screen in a completely different way to activate the viewer and their own awareness of their own body, their own situation. And then to go into these kinds of films where that physical intensity has translated into a very different approach, where it's back to the single screen, but it still really penetrates quite strongly. And I mean, I'm also interested, I guess, if you go back and you think about the Felix Gonzalez Torres image or Illuminaire and this idea of the disappearing body, Bobby Sands going on hunger strike and letting his own body waste away, for a very specific political purpose. Mm-hmm. But how do you, at what point did you decide you were interested in Bobby Sands, and at what point, how did you begin to bridge your gallery practice with this kind of filmmaking?
Well, I'll start with how I started with the idea of making a film with Bobby Sands. I was 11 years old, and on television there was always an image of this guy. At the time when I was 11 years old, and underneath his image was a number. And the next day I saw it on television, BBC News. We religiously watched. The number had changed. And I asked my mother, well, I might have thought it was his age. And I asked my mother, well, why is this numbers changing on this guy? And she said, he's on hunger strike. And I didn't understand, hunger strike? And she said to me that, in order to be heard, he stopped eating. And it was one of those strange moments when you're 11 years old, I think you're trying to do the maths, and you're like, eating, being heard, and everything going to the mouth. And I thought to myself, well, I understood it, and I could relate to it in a way. I thought to myself, well, yes, it's almost like, as we all can to a certain extent, as a child, you've been there when your mother and father says to you, if you don't, you're not going to leave this table until you finish eating that food. And the only control you have, is abstaining from eating. I mean, what time you go to bed, what clothes you wear, what time you get up, it's all your control. And the only control you have is through your body. And I remember in my research, for hunger, I remember reading 3 days before after Bobby Sands died, and Pauline Kael did an interview with Godard, where Godard said the reason why the Barnum and Bobby Sands are interesting, are important, because they're childish. I was like, well, what does he mean, Godard? Of course, Godard being Godard, you start scratching your head and thinking, trying to do it. And I kind of understood in a way through what I was thinking about when I was 11 years old. I mean, when you're young, there's a sense of morals which are sort of very forthright and such. And the whole idea of this abstinence and using one's body as a weapon in a way, sort of just stuck with me. And of course, at a certain moment, I mean, I never, the whole idea of having a career in film, it's the word career, I almost want to spit when I hear it. That was never interesting for me. It was, the reason why I wanted to make a film about hunger was because the subject, which was stayed with me for such a long time, asked to be a narrative film. It could have asked to be a sculpture, it could have asked to be a painting, it could have asked to be something else, but it asked to be a narrative film. So I had to facilitate that through making a feature film.
But this is not a conventional narrative film, and I think when you mentioned earlier this interest in what's outside of the frame, or as I mentioned earlier, your intense desire to take repressed histories and make them intensely physically visible. I mean, it's interesting. Well, maybe let's just show the next clip quickly, and then we'll get back to this idea of narrative filmmaking and why this is not a conventional documentary or narrative about a specific historical figure.
Okay.
faced now with the failure of their discredited cause, the men of violence have chosen in recent months to play what may well be their last card. They've turned their violence against themselves through the prison hunger strike to death. They seek to work on the most basic of human emotions, pity, as a means of creating tension and stoking the fires of bitterness and hatred.
So this is not conventional cinema or documentary cinema or narrative cinema, and you've segued from pissing onto the lens of your own camera to shooting the piss of the prisoners, which is the only remaining trace that you see of them in this empty hallway. And yet, without really giving too much away, this is one of the greatest indictments of Mrs. Thatcher, who's also disembodied, and the only evidence of her is her voice.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, what was interesting for me was this whole battle. There's always a battle. What you see there is actually what happened. Once the guys what they would of course smear their excrement on the walls inside their prison cells. It was called a dirty protest. They went on for 5 years. There was a no wash protest, and then what they would do was they pour the urine out underneath the door into the corridor. The ritual was that every night the prison officer would go there with a bottle of detergent as you see, and pour it onto the piss, and started to clean it up, of course. And some of the people that he didn't like, or he thought were the leaders of the IRA in prison, he would sweep it underneath their door, so their rooms would be flooded with this urine and detergent. And there was this ritual. And this comes after a very long sequence of Bobby Sands talking to a priest about why he wanted to sort of go on hunger strike. And again, it's one of those sort of scenes which, after such a long, intense conversation, this is almost like a lull. Where you just lull, you allow the audience to digest this huge, quite forceful bit of information where Bobby Sands is saying to the priest that he wants to die, that he's going to sort of go on hunger strike to the death. The whole idea of this sequence, as far as you said, conventional cinema. I don't know what conventional cinema is, really. I just again, I was, there's this thing called Hollywood or American films, which is apparently, maybe that's conventional apparently. But I was looking at films from all over the world, and I tried to sort of get an idea. I was very lucky when I was growing up in England, in the late, very early 90s. That we had great repertory cinemas where there were show double bills of films from Korea to sort of Turkey to France to of course America and everywhere around the world. There were huge retrospectives. Every week we had this cinema system which would only show old films. So it was almost like looking at the classics, almost like reading the classics. Mm-hmm. I used to do as a student. Definitely I used to sort of at least see 5 films a week. So the whole idea of what was possible, what was not, was always interesting to me, and also what you could find yourself. Because this shot, after the idea was to do just a sweeping, but then afterwards, after I saw it happen, I thought, oh my God, they said this is a map, and I was talking about it. I said, Sean, Bobby, my cameraman, who's been working with for 13 years, we need to sort of trace this with the camera. So it was one of those things which occur often through the moment. And it makes sense to you then because it does make sense in a linear way. So again, even with 12 Years a Slave, I'm very surprised that Fox want to distribute it. I'm very surprised that people want to see it in a large number. Fingers crossed. We're opening tonight on 1,144 cinemas. I'm like, really? I'm really kind of. So it's not. I've never tried to do anything. I never tried to do anything to sort of make my films friendly anyway. I just want to sort of tell some kind of truth within what I was doing. That was my criteria. I never was thinking about making a dime. I never have. I worked in supermarkets before, but that was it. I was never got into this to make bloody money, for sure not. So,
But I think maybe the 3 major things that a lot of critics talk about when they talk about the feature films that maybe distinguishes what you do from other filmmakers, is again this intense physicality, your particular use of sound, and the long duration. These kinds of takes, which really come much more out of Warhol or Chantal Akerman than they do other kinds of filmmaking. And so it's almost back to this idea of the camera that doesn't close its eye. It's this unwavering gaze.
Yes, but also there's also the language. I mean, cinema. How old is cinema? 130 years old, possibly. I mean, it's a baby. I mean, in the way that how we look at things. So there is no conventional way of looking at anything other than if it's right or wrong, or boring or not, or does it make sense or does. So for me, the whole idea of, for example, I'll take the last question first. The sort of the holding shots, for example, in 12 Years a Slave, there's a shot of, there's a few long shots, or hunger or shame. It's about it's about real time. In the movie where we're cutting and we're having film time, real time, for the audience to sort of engage with something at that present moment in time. So you obliterate the frame and you allow people to sort of enter and be present, similar to the earlier works in a way. Be present with the image. Somehow I want the frame to evaporate, and you're present with that image then and now. We are in real time now. I mean, sometimes again, we'll see a couple of examples, I imagine, and we could talk through it. Well, there was two other things which I forgot about. Sorry.
Sound.
Okay, sound design. I think because we have great radio in Britain. I mean, great radio. And as a kid growing up, I mean, you put on the radio and you're in the Amazon. And you're there, you hear the cutlass thrashing through the sort of undergrowth. You're sort of embedded. You hear the birds and stuff. You're rambling. You're somehow you've transported yourself into this tropical rainforest. As far as the television, you put a TV on. It's something which is remote. It's in the box. It's almost like a fish tank. You're not immersed in it, and that's what was interesting with sound is that it does so much a better job sometimes than the actual images. And again, it's a sense of I always want like that the idea of this idea of someone blindfolding you and pushing you into someone's apartment, and through touch and to sense and all your other senses other than your eyes, you sort of try to negotiate your way around this room, and that's what I want, to sort of have that sensual experience for the audience when they're in a situation of sound, because again, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like smell. Again, that's the thing that brings out the best, not images, not photographs of your family, or smell brings such a powerful sense of memory, doesn't it? Huge. And those elements, those other senses, I'm trying to sort of somehow trick in some ways with the audience. Not trick necessarily, it's a horrible word, but to sort of introduce as such, in a way. There was one more, I can't remember.
Well, just to develop that point, because I think this is something partly why I showed Illuminaire at the beginning, is this again, threshold between the virtual and the real that I think is what's one of the major things at stake in your work. This idea that, we'll get on to shame in just a minute, but this idea that it is about a sex addict, that his whole life is controlled by physical desire and by, a robotic desire to touch in a very different way than the one you're describing. But that is framed within this, again, the digital light, the digital world, the world of laptop screens and addiction. But in terms of, there are a lot of artists at the moment, and I would actually say arguably maybe particularly in Britain, like Ed Atkins and James Richards, who I think their work is really about trying to navigate the haptic in the digital world. So, within the sea of images and information and virtuality, trying to reclaim a sense of place and a sense of touch and the ability to have that direct contact, which we're actually losing to some extent, which is a very abstract thought, but I think it is happening. Yeah. So how does that play into your interest in touch and physical sensation?
Well, I think cinema. I fast forward I jumped into cinema because having an audience and being present with the audience while you're watching something is, it just shows you how relevant it is still and how powerful it is still. With the film 12 Years a Slave, there's so much debate going on about that particular film, about the subject matter. As I said before, you've seen the program notes, yes, that film could be a starting point for a conversation. It's that powerful. You know, arguing, discussing, agreeing, finding out, thinking. So that's my way in order to sort of come out of that sort of, how can I say, that kind of play the spaghetti as such as what's going on now. It's just messy, and to come out of that and to be clear or such, or to be singular.
I mean, do you think, and particularly as an artist whose work really came to the fore in the 90s, and a generation which is largely associated now with relational aesthetics or other means of generating some kind of collectivity or some kind of community or some kind of an interrogation of togetherness of different kinds. And do you think the politics in the room of being together in a cinema like this, real bodies next to real bodies, is different than the kind of networking that happens online and the kinds of community formation that happens
absolutely,
there?
absolutely.
And why?
I mean, I'll just give an example. There was a producer friend of mine who was working for Channel 4, was in Toronto, and he was going to view 12 Years a Slave. And you sit next to, he's a white guy, we sit next to this black woman, American, he's English, she was about 45 or so, he says. She sat next down and I said, hello, and she started talking to him, so, I've been queuing for an hour or so to get in. And I said, oh, great. And they sat there and watched the movie. Towards the end of the movie, he said he felt a hand slide across his hand, and they held each other's hand. And towards obviously towards the end of the movie, when the end of the movie ended, they started crying and held each other and held on to each other. Now that's not rare with. You know, it's strange with 12 Years a Slave because we've had a lot of, with other festivals and so forth, and what we experienced. And that kind of feeling of humanity, and I mean, that answers your question. I mean, it's the power of cinema. I mean, it's huge. It's just huge. It's to be,
I mean, maybe as a counterpoint, we could show the clip from Shame, because arguably Michael Fassbender's character is experiencing the opposite
completely.
situation.
Yeah. Let's have a look at that now.
If you could just show the next clip from Shame as well, and then we'll just dive in after that.
Brandon, it's Sissy. I really need to talk to you. Please, will you pick up the fucking phone? Brandon, I need you. We're not bad people. We just come from a bad place.
So with this film, you're dealing with a really intense kind of urban alienation. It's exactly the opposite of the collectivity we were just talking about.
Yeah. 90% of the internet traffic is pornography, people looking at pornography in one way, shape, form, or the other, webcams, films, whatever. And again, I don't know if it's a new addiction, but it's an addiction, obviously, where it's become to the fore. It came to the fore for me. I mean, one knew about it, through celebrities like Michael Douglas and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, Tiger Woods. And at the time of making it, Tiger Woods incident happened in London. I wanted to make the film in London, but knowing the media, no one wanted to talk to us because they thought we were part of the media. And I think with sex addiction, it's just sort of finding out about it and talking to experts, because we came to New York to make the film in the end, because that was a place we thought would be the best place. The whole idea of access, and demand at any time. I thought this was that was the best place for it, that film. And of course, talking to experts in the field, the sort of pain and the certain sense of, I think we all here know someone who, is or was, or maybe obviously people who have alcohol problems or issues. And you think of the Billy Wilder movie, Lost Weekend, which was a huge sensation, and in the 40s when it was made. To fast forward to what I wanted to deal with shame, because again, it's another avenue for one to lose themselves through sexual addiction. And of course, there's lots of there's accessibility to is it pornography or whatever it is, to sort of manifest that state. And it was just one of those things where I just wanted to sort of look at that, because it was about all of us here. I imagine 99 or 98% of us have arrived there through sex. And I imagine in the high 90s we all have participated in sex. Of course, I say high 90s because maybe there's obviously percentages that haven't. And I just wanted to make a film where people had a relationship to what the character was going through. But again, it's like alcohol. You drink it, but some people obviously don't go over the top. It was just very interesting to me to look at that whole idea of the body and needing someone else to gratify that addiction.
And I mean, we've talked before about the light in this film, which again, it's the light of laptops. It's this very white, very alienating light. It's not really the light of cinema as we once knew it, which was a very amber, warm, welcoming light. And I mean, light and darkness play such critical roles in your work, I think. The way in which, certainly in a film like Western Deep, where
Sure.
darkness is one of the key characters almost.
Well, it's kind of interesting, the dark, and it's kind of interesting. You could tell more about an image or tell more about a situation through darkness, because half the time when we look at something, everything's not in sharp focus. It's more sort of obscured. We read more in between the lines than actually what we see. And I think with the film as an image or quality, just as when we look at something, it's much more real. It's much more. Real is not a word, but it's much more based in reality. A certain kind of darkness, a certain kind of obscurity, because it puts you into a certain state of mind where it's another kind of you're thinking about what you're looking at in a way. I'll get there. I'll be better in a second. I'm climbing. I've got the idea. It's going to be formulated in the next clip. I'm getting there. Maybe it's a little bit like Braille in a way. When you feel it, you know it. There's this, you don't have to show. It's like, it's about something which is, it's almost like a veil over someone's eyes. It's kind of interesting. It says more about the image than it would do if it was sort of visible. It's strange, but true.
But I mean, you've spoken previously about why you chose New York for this film in particular. Yes. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of research you did and why New York City? Well,
New York City was because the access and it's a 24-hour city. And I thought that character of Brandon, the whole idea that he getting what he wanted when he wanted. And also the choice of what you want, how you want. I mean, the choice of, for example, forgive me, prostitutes and stuff. I mean, you get whatever you want. And it's the whole the accessibility, and which is New York. And the whole idea of what we the experts in the field were in New York, and speaking to them about, again, there's a huge sexual addiction within minority communities, huge, because it's just about a certain kind of gratification. And within Wall Street, of course, there's that's always the sort of one people talk about, because it's a case of a certain kind of gratification. It's a very odd. Again, I got a lot of you get a lot of stones thrown at you, because it's to do with sex. There's no such thing as sex addiction now, but it's just another way of losing oneself through an activity of getting high. I mean, if it's drugs, if it's whatever, it's sex, it's alcohol.
And to what extent, I mean, what you said earlier about the frame and trying to dissolve the frame or that barrier between the audience and the screen, how does that play into the idea that in really all three of your feature films, you're dealing with prisons, you're dealing with cellular confinement of some kind, whether it's through addiction, through imprisonment, or
interesting,
through slavery?
Because I mean, to me, there was a direct line from Bobby Sands to Brandon Sullivan here. Played by Bobby Sands, played by Michael Fassbender, in the way that you have Bobby Sands, who's actually in prison in a British prison cell, designed to keep the Barnum off. Basically, the prison, the H block was designed by Germans to keep the Barnum off, which was transported to Northern Ireland, and you got this guy in a solitary confinement, but within that environment, he transcends his environment through owning it, through him controlling who he was within that, and sort of having a sense of freedom within that confines of a prison cell in the North Sea. Then you've got the opposite of that. The complete opposite of that is Brandon, who is in an access for everything sort of environment in New York City. He's very well paid. He has a total absolute freedom, but through his freedom, he has put himself into a prison, his own prison. And that's often, again, there was a lot of people talking, we did a lot of research. It was a lot to do with people's backgrounds and parents and there's lots of things happen. I mean, again, when you see Brandon in the film with Sissy, his sister, they never speak about their parents. Never. You imagine when your brother said this, a conversation with their parents would occur. They never do. And it's not to give anything away. It's just to do with certain people's circumstances and how what happens. We're all here because our parents fucked us up a bit, obviously. And but it was interesting to sort of delve into that. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but it was just interesting to delve into that. And it's just completely opposite. I want to make a character that's completely opposite to Bobby Sands, but about now. And I think it was just one of those things where I had to go there, really.
I mean, arguably, Brandon's problems are first world problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most difficult film to think about, to talk about, because it's so, you could talk about hunger in this way, you could talk about slave this way. I think this one, because it's so kind of, people often don't care about Brandon, and understandable. Much I care about this good-looking guy who's a sex addict. But it's not just, it's too easy to brush people off in that way. It's just too easy.
But maybe before we get on to 12 Years a Slave, I just wanted to quickly talk about Gravesend and Western Deep as well, and maybe set the stage for, relations between, even the fact that, talking about digital culture and its impact on somebody like Brandon, and then to go to coltan, the mineral that's mined in the Congo, which is one of the primary subjects in
No.
in Gravesend. And could you bring up the still from Gravesend, please?
Okay. Well, this is in a place called Wali Kali, in the middle of the Congo, which I flew into. Look at it in Google Earth. It's just bush. It's crazy. It's a very dangerous place. We flew in there. We flew in there with the planes, the wings of the planes clipping foliage. We get in there, and the Russian pilots, dodgy Russian pilots. Everything is dodgy out there. We trekked for 50 kilometers after we landed, and then we got to this place, this clearance, where we thought we saw these kind of miners. Next morning, all the miners were dressed in military uniform, and we were taken to this place where they dug coltan. A coltan, if you don't know, it's in your pocket right now. It's in every digital electronic piece of equipment. It's a conductor. It doesn't overheat. And in 1999, coltan, a kilo of coltan was $100. So lawyers and doctors were putting their hats and canes behind and going into the bush and digging this thing out because it's shallow mining. What happened at that time? I think there was PlayStation 2 occurred. Where it pushed the price up of coltan to a record high, and there was some kind of collapse in the market. People were buying it, stockpiling it. So there was this huge thing. It was called black gold. It is called black gold, and obviously I'm sure people here know about it. So I was interested in filming that process, filming the sort of the actual that mining, and it was linked to another piece I did called Western Deep, which was in South Africa.
Bring up the still from Western Deep, please.
South Africa, which is a mine just outside of Johannesburg, which is it's 3.5 miles on the ground. This mine is the deepest mine in the world, and it's a gold mine. And it has 5,000 men working on it every day, and I was just interested in that whole idea of, again, it was a case of, this was the first thing I did with Sean Bobbitt, by the way, my cinematographer I've been working with for 13 years, who have it's an art piece, but we've been, shot all my feature films. Anyway, we shot on Super 8 camera, but I'll get back to what I was just talking about before. It was just all about that kind of whole idea of minerals and the depths. I mean, gold isn't rare. It's just difficult to get. And I just was interested because we would go down this elevator shaft, and then we would walk and then catch a train, and then we go down the elevator shaft and then walk and get it, because it would do that, obviously had to stagger it, otherwise the whole could collapse. And then it basically takes 3 hours to get to the face of the mining, and 3 hours to go back up. So you can imagine during the apartheid time, they just keep people down there because there were less productivity. Now obviously they can't do that. It's sort of, it's like 10-hour days. So they've only got, sometimes they've only got 4 hours of work, because they have to change, to travel, to get up to the surface takes 3 hours, and down 3 hours just to get to the surface. So it was just, do you have another slide of it, the guys in there? Oh no, okay. Anyway, and it was just one of those sort of places where there was this regime there, which is incredible. Unfortunately, we don't have a slide of it, where every miner once a year has to be tested. Is for their fitness, and what they do is they're given these sort of bright blue loincloths. They're naked, and they are put into this room which is heated, something like it's a sauna basically, heated to the temperatures you will find underground. It is piping hot down there, and there's about 7 or 8 long slabs going to a room which is, I don't know, I'll say in meters. Was it in feet? I don't know. I would say about 25 meters long, 30 meters long room, which I don't know what that converts into feet, but quite long. I mean, it's about this stage to there, this stage, and in a kind of wide room. And these guys would have to do the steps, and there will be this noise of meh, meh, this red light going up and going down, where you have to sort of do these steps, and it's like something out of a slave ship or concentration camp image. I mean, you got I don't know how many people in that room. There's about 250 men in this room, going up and down, and up and down. I mean, just to test their fitness. The situation that these guys would not be from South Africa. None of them are. They're from Angola or neighboring African countries. They would come for work, to mine. And basically that room was not a room of exercise. It was not a room. It was a room of testing. And if you didn't pass that test, well, that's it. Your livelihood, your family, I mean, it was a test of survival. I mean, it was really, it was brutal.
Where do you, I mean, in terms of, I mean, there are maybe interesting correspondences between the scene we showed from Hunger when the beating of the shields, and these very almost militaristic formations with repetitive gestures. I mean, how did you begin to kind of hone this interest in very specific kinds of gestures? I mean, in a way it relates to your earliest work as well, I think.
Cruelty is formal. I mean,
Cruelty is formal.
I mean, there you go. I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we're running short on time, so if you could show the first clip from 12 Years a Slave, which also has a strong resonance, I think, with what we've just been discussing.
Ah, Mr. Ford. Splendid seeing you, sir. What catches your fancy? This lounge is very brawny, yeah?
How much are the ones Platt and Eliza?
Yes. 1,000 for Platt. This is a creature of considerable talent, I assure you. 700 for Eliza, my fairest price.
You will accept a note?
Please,
of course,
sir,
from you, Mr.
do not
Ford.
divide my family. Do not take me unless you take my children.
Eliza, quiet!
You will have the most faithful slave with me, the most
Liza.
faithful slave that's ever lived, but I beg that you do
price
not
for the boy.
separate
Yes, the
us. Please.
Stop it! I will give you something to cry about. Randall, come forward. Come. Now, you see how fit this boy is. Like ripe fruit. May I take your stick a moment? Observe this, Randall. Jump, run. Very good. Higher. You see this? Very likely. He will grow into a fine beast.
So, how did you get from an interest in empire, colonialism, slave labor, and come across the Atlantic to slavery in the United States?
Well, I wanted to make a movie about slavery. I had an idea, as such, of a free man in the North who gets kidnapped into slavery. And that through his journey through the maze, we, the audience, follow him, trying to get back home. I was working with a writer at the time, George Ridley, and wasn't having too much luck. And then my wife said to me, why don't you sort of look into true accounts of slavery? She found this book in both our research. It's called 12 Years a Slave. And as soon as I had the book in my hand, it's kind of strange that sometimes you have an idea and it's formalized. It is there already, especially as a screenplay. And it's like, my goodness, this idea is there. And that was it, really. Again, I had been looking in the Americas and everywhere, but there was this story that for me resonated, possibly just because I live in Amsterdam, and it reminded me very much of Anne Frank's diary. And in fact, I found out it's only a first-hand account of someone who was into slavery and survived and got out. And again, I was mad at myself for not knowing the book, but then I realized that no one I knew the book.
Do you think your perspective as a British artist gives you a different point of view on this subject than if you were Afro-American?
No, I don't. It's one of those situations where, my background is my parents are from the West Indies. My mother's from Grenada. My father's from Grenada. My mother was born in Trinidad. Grenada is where Malcolm X's mother was born. Trinidad is where Stokely Carmichael was born, the guy who coined the phrase Black Power. I mean, you could think of Colin Powell. You could think of Henry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Marcus Garvey. I mean, there's Marcus Garvey. There's this crossover. You can think of hip hop. Starting in Jamaica with Toast. I mean, it's about the diaspora, and slavery was never a American sort of owned thing. It was a world owned thing. It was industry. It's the biggest industry in America, the longest industry in America ever had.
I mean, it's interesting if you think about, again, first world problems, somebody like Brandon, the slave economy in Africa that supports the technologies that he uses, the social reality that he lives in that stems from slavery in this country. And I mean, I think there's an interesting network going on across your work that has some very unpleasant truths to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, me sitting here, I mean, someone's paying for it. Absolutely. And again, it's the same situation when you think of 12 Years a Slave in 1853 when Solomon became free. I mean, you fast forward to 160 years later to today. I mean, my clothes and stuff. Someone, some sweatshop somewhere, in the world, someone is enslaved. I mean, again, it's a different paradigm, different times, and how maybe that the movie will be made of them in 160 years' time. So it's where we are now, really.
And how did you?
And it's interesting. Thank you for the connection to Brandon as well, because again, it's to do with those first world things. You say problems are very current and very, important, as well as 12 Years a Slave. The hierarchy is not because one is suffering. You can suffer in different ways. Of course, one is suffering more. There's no two ways about it, but it is, as you say, connected.
And then, before we show one last clip, and then we can go into questions from the audience, maybe just talk a little bit about, dealing with a primary text like Northrop's, as opposed to dealing with, the kinds of research you might have done about Bobby Sands, or the kinds of research you did interviewing sex addicts. This is a really important document that you've gotten into this guy's head.
Yeah.
How did Chiwetel work with you to achieve this unbelievable performance? And then in the scene that we'll show, I think you see how all of these things in your work come together in this one scene, I think. But go for it.
Well, the research never stops because we just found the book. Because for me, I'm meticulous. I like detail. I'm a bit of a freak about detail. Just again, even when we were doing Hunger, it was all about, was it raining on that day? What kind of rain? When do you get used to the feces on the wall? What was it like in the summer when the blue bottles came? Because these questions were never asked to these guys. When you read the history books, it's about this happened on that day, it happened on that day, and then this happened this day. It's never about the details. What was it like? What was this, what the details and the taste, the smell, and those things actually make history, the details again. So I was, again, as we did on 12 Years a Slave, the right, again, the amount of research and, it becomes so, and again with Henry Gates Lewis Jr., who was a wonderful person to sort of reference down then, but we went to talk about the details of the shackles, where the people came from, so forth, what plantations, what would they plant on their plantation, the clothes, some of the clothes in the movie are actually real, this clothes are real slave clothes. We had a wonderful woman called Patty Norris, who was a genius costume designer, and we had, obviously Sean Bobbitt was meticulous. I'm just trying to remember my art director. Adam Stockhausen, my art director, was just, so that combination of people and detail and also accuracy was very important. Accuracy, as much as I could, of course.
Okay, so we'll show a clip where I think.
Chiwetel, I'll get later.
Oh yeah. Okay. Again, I think this brings together this interest in the haptic, in the political subject, in duration. Let's show the clip, please.
Solomon, can I interest you in a new cravat? Pure silk by way of the French.
We're in need of a fresh carry-off in my missus's travels. Nothing more.
The year is passed already. Off to work at Sandy Hill again.
I am.
I have just the thing. Something to suit your style and yet sturdy enough for the 40-mile round trip.
It's beautiful.
At what price?
We will take it. Children, come see what your father has just purchased for me.
One moment, sir, you'll be assisted.
Mr. Parker,
Sir.
we could discuss the price.
Forgive me, Solomon. Mrs. Northup, a customer waits. Welcome, sir.
Shop well, sir, but mind your wallet.
Pay no attention to this gentleman's nonsense.
Jasper! My regrets for the intrusion, sir.
No intrusion.
Good day, sir.
Good day.
Jasper. Out.
Okay, so maybe if you want to just say one word about Chiwetel, and then I think we'll open it up.
We started talking. I started talking to him about Valentino and Buster Keaton because it was all about the face. It was always about the eyes. I was very on him about, eyes, because most of the time he doesn't say much, Solomon, and he can't say much. Obviously, he can't reveal who he really is. So it's a case of the audience, and that direct relationship with the audience I mean, you know, when you're talking to someone, you often know when they're lying because we read faces. It's the same thing as I was speaking about as far as the dark is concerned, or, you know, things which are cast in darkness. You read it, but you see somebody and you can read in between the lines. We all can. I think with Solomon, it was very important that he had, his face was sensitive to the moment. And we just kept on talking. I kept on showing him, you know, again, Valentino and Keaton and how that connection. It was a lot. I mean, at first it was like it was drumming it home all the time, and afterward he got it, and that translates to an audience. I mean, you know, there was some kind of a conversation very early on, which wasn't a conversation at all about voiceover. We got to understand what's in his head. No, we have to feel and have to understand it because we, as an audience, I trust the audience to sort of recognize what's going on with Solomon. That's what we spoke about, and that was amazing. I mean, again, we get if you've seen the movie, there's a shot at the end where there's this long sort of held shot on Solomon, and he's obviously he's older, and he's been sort of on the plantation for obviously a while, and you know, just holding the camera on his face and seeing him do what he did. I mean, you know, tell me an actor that could hold the screen for a minute and a half and do nothing, and it'd be absolutely captivating. By that time, he was you know, an athlete in that.
It's a great film. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take audience questions, please. And as you
I
heard
can see.
previously, if you could just wait for the mic and speak carefully into it. Just one over there.
About the scene when Solomon starts singing with the other slaves?
That scene again. It was an Alan Lomax recording of a old slave spiritual, and what was interesting for me, and again it relates to what we just talked about as far as Solomon's face, is. At that point in the film, he's at his lowest ebb. You know, his letter's been found. The letter he's been trying to write for years. He's been nearly caught because someone has betrayed him. He's at this lowest ebb of him thinking he will ever see his family again. And he's at this. If some people haven't seen the film, he's at a funeral of one of the slaves who was just collapsed in the field after being worked, you know, forever. And through the song, you know, what Stuart does, and is from the lowest ebb, he goes to the highest spiritual sort of exuberance one could feel in one shot, and it's just, you know, that he becomes one of them. He's a member. He becomes one of the community then. He accepts in somehow, and through that acceptance and through that sort of understanding of hope, he, you know, touches something in him very deep inside. And it was just, it is what it is. That's the description of it, and I hope it is translated. Yeah.
Just here, and then.
Yes, hi. I have a two-part question. My first one is, well, first I'll just say that the movie had quite an impact on me, and it's brought about a lot of discussions with my friends, and I guess I assumed within the African American community that most people would be like myself and would want to go out and see it right away. And I found that there's a few circles that have said that they won't see that they're not going to see the movie, they don't want to see it, and feel as though there should be focus on other types of things other than slavery, such as Black Wall Street, as an example of one of the discussions I participated in. So my first question is, what are your thoughts on that, and whose responsibility are those types of stories to bring to film? And then my second question...
Well, I understand that. Whose responsibility is it what?
To bring to life these types of other stories about African Americans, because the context of the conversations that have been taking place have been, like...
Understood, yes.
Don't go see it because...
next part of the
what about
question,
these?
sorry.
Then the second question is just, there was also a comment about the scene with Northup and when Sally was being beaten towards the end. And the comment was that it was to punish him versus Sally. Was that an
Patsy?
incorrect?
No, punish him, no. Anyway, I'll answer the first part of the question. Look, someone asked me a question the other day, when was the first time when was the first time I came in contact with slavery? And to be honest, it shocked me, that question, because I was like, it was like asking someone, it was like asking me, or asking you, when was the first time you learned your name? It was a very strange thing. Thank you for putting me up on the mic. And it was very strange in the way that as a child, as a child, to have that start in life where you understand the idea, you have an idea of slavery, or you have that early idea of slavery. It does a very strange thing. It actually puts you in a situation where you ask yourself a question about your society you're in and where you are in that society at a very early age. So one can see that as a disadvantage or an advantage. All I remember as a young person, I felt a tremendous sense of shame and embarrassment of finding that out. So for me, this film was all about taming that, mastering it. In order to sort of go forward, one has to go backwards and embrace that in order to move on, just like other groups have done within their unfortunate past. It's a must. And to sort of put a blinker on it, didn't happen, hasn't happened, is to sort of walk around somehow with a limp. I want to walk straight. I don't want to be afraid or fear anything. I want to look at something and embrace it, and master it. That's why I wanted to make the film. The whole idea, anyway, the second half of that question was all about Patsy. No. Poor Mr. Epps, no, not at all. But what's interesting about Epps, and why I have a sympathy for him in a way, he's a racist, he's a plantation owner, he's a monster to a certain extent, but he's a human being. So for me there's sympathy, because he doesn't understand that he's in love with Patsy. He's in love with her. But he doesn't understand, how am I, a plantation owner, in love with this slave? How is that possible? And this is Patsy, who goes off to see Mrs. Epps Mrs. Shaw every Sunday, who is openly, Mrs. Shaw is openly married. This black woman, she's the mistress of the house. So Epps is jealous that she goes there every Sunday, and he's thinking possibly Shaw is having a thing with her. I mean, obviously not. It's just jealousy. But he does obviously assure as well that he's having an open relationship, marriage with a black woman. So he, for me, he tries to destroy his love for Patsy by destroying her. That's what it is. Patsy is the victim here for sure. So that's that.
Thanks, gentlemen, for coming in for the great dialogue. It's rare you come across a piece of art that challenges you to ask yourself what kind of person you are. And that's 12 years was that kind of work. And I had some insight that maybe it was like, in European history, when painting first came along, 600, 700, 800 years ago, how when people first saw paintings, it was a revolution because they actually saw for the first time something they'd only heard about with words and language. And it's in this kind of story, you can feel it. It comes to life in slavery. And following along that line, there seems to be, you have such a strong sense of morality, ethics, and a strong spiritual sort of rudder in your work. Could you speak about where that comes from and what guides your true direction?
I think just being human. It's as simple as that, being a human being, and thinking of as you as me, and hopefully you thinking of me as you. That's all. It's respect. That's it. It's very simple. It's not. I wish I could give you a better, clever answer, but it's just very simple.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm so excited. I love your shoes.
Thank you. You noticed.
You don't know what you mean. As an artist, you don't know what you mean to me. I was at the barbershop getting ready to come here, and earlier today, and we were all in the barbershop, and we were all talking, and Denzel Washington was on screen on one of his many movies, and you came up, and it was 4 guys who own this barbershop, and they all have kids, and I didn't mention that I was coming here tonight, but we all started talking about it, and we were really excited, and having that moment of why is Quentin Tarantino our critical race theorist, and why does everybody want to see his other film? Why aren't we talking about this film? And one of the things I said, I was like, well, it's uncomfortable. Americans, white people are really uncomfortable. And when I'm in the presence of your work, I'm relieved, and I feel good, and I feel seen. And I don't have to work really, really hard to have that language to go around white people so they feel comfortable.
Well, not just white people, trust me. We just had examples of black people.
Yeah, and this is how I've internalized white supremacy also. I have to say, well, I want to see Black Wall Street. And it's that internalization. How do you do this? How do you move through these spaces? Because the guys at the barbershop, I have to go back and talk to them about this. How do you negotiate your language and move through these spaces and talk about your work like that?
Just do it. It's simple. Just do it. I mean, there's no big Einstein idea. I mean, come on, just be true to yourself. Just do it. I mean, why do you too much thinking? Just do it. It's just, I mean, it's no, and I don't mean, it's the truth. No, it's just do it. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, it's naked. It's there. I mean, it's very simple. I wish I was more. No.
Steve, I'd just like to ask you, but the relationship between art and film, where audience comes in terms of the scale, because you're saying 1,100 cinemas, it's clearly at a scale that people are able to discuss in the barbershops at a level that isn't necessarily going to happen in a museum context. And finance and how films are funded is obviously very different to how art projects are funded. If it were possible that you had the same budget, but it was going to be an artwork, how would that influence, would it influence the work or your decision to make it more as an artwork or a film work?
Well, that hypothesis I can't really give you an answer there. I don't have an answer that costs $20 million in my head, possibly one day. But I mean, the whole idea of art and film, it's like, who reads poetry? Hardly anyone reads poetry, but for me, art is poetry, and it's the fraction, it's the fracturing, it's the sort of the compressing of language, using the same words as you would with a yarn, with the decompressing, the story. So for me, art is in some ways poetry, and film is the novel as such. It's like, again, one is sort of, it's like Beckett and Joyce in a way.
Wanted to ask a question about your film Hunger. When Bobby Sands in your script talks about that sense of personal freedom, and then we reflect on that unbending voice of Margaret Thatcher speaking in an unrelenting kind of a separate reality. Today in Britain, what's come forward from 1981 is an electronic surveillance society. And the people who are on trial right now for breaking into people's cell phones, and the issue of data privacy in America is a growing concern. I'm just wondering if you would comment about that conflict of freedom and the camera and surveillance.
Wow, I mean, I think what happened in Britain was that the reason we got more cameras than anywhere in the world, I think, it was to do with IRA bombing London. And that's when they started to put up a lot of cameras. That was in the 80s, early 80s, started putting up a lot of cameras. And it was, I think it was, again, it became a great excuse to put up a lot of cameras to spy on us. As far as, again, the commenting on surveillance, and, it's a strange thing. It's one of those things where, you know, we all know we're being spied upon, phone calls, and you know, tracked, and with our computers and so forth, and phones and whatever. But what can we do about it? It's very odd, isn't it? We're all, you know, it's like, I love that Bob Marley song. He goes, one day I woke up a prisoner. Oh Lord, well, one day I woke up in a curfew. Oh Lord, I am a prisoner too. You know, it's kind of, what can we do about it? I don't know. You know, they start throwing up phones and computers in the bin. I don't know.
Could you talk a little bit about the Paul Robeson piece?
Paul Robeson, oh God. Oh. Okay, that's interesting. Yes, again, apologize. Well, Paul Robeson, I don't know anyone who knows Paul Robeson. Anyone? Most people do. Right? No, it's amazing. And Paul, you know, he was under surveillance since. Again, he died in 1978, and he was under surveillance since the 30s. You know, it's CIA. Excuse me, it's not CIA, FBI. Excuse me, was basically trailing him, tapping his phone, letters, correspondence, you know, for, you know, what was it, 50 years, was it 40 years? Crazy. And he was just an interesting guy to me. I mean, again, I don't want to go. I'm quite tired right now. And he was just one of those guys who was just an amazing man. You know, and you have to find out a lot about him if you don't. Anyway, he was under surveillance for a certain amount of time, and I did this piece where I got all these FBI files, and I did a thing called end credits, where I slowly sort of almost like end credits sort of went down with these pieces of paper, and you saw how he was sort of what his surveillance was, and I've got these people to do voiceovers and read all the files. It was just immense, that weight. Sorry, I wish I hadn't asked me that question now, because I apologize, but you've got to know who Paul Robeson. If you don't know who Paul Robeson is, please find out. Okay, very important man.
Just gentleman down here, and then in the center.
What advice, if you could travel back in time, what advice would you give to the kid with the 8mm Bolex that you said you used earlier when you first started out?
Very camera.
If any at all.
I was lucky. I was very lucky growing up in Britain at that time. You know, I went to university. You know, I did my masters, and they dropped out in my. You know, I was at a time when I had free education. I was at a time when I could go to school and do what I wanted to do and not think. You know, I was very lucky. I grew up. I was living in the inner city, and then my mother, we moved to the suburbs in a place called Ealing, which is it was called the Queen of the Suburbs. We had parks. You know, I could go out all summer, you know, with my friends and lie in the park and, you know, play and stuff. And I wasn't running around sort of housing estates and stuff and, you know, doing, you know, stealing things from. I was in the park. It's an environment. I was very lucky, and I was very lucky at that time that there was a system which was free education. You go to university for free. You go do a master's for free. You know, I was very fortunate. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't happen in Britain. And education is not free anymore, which is a crime, an absolute crime. So, you know, that's the only reason why I'm sitting here now, because I was very fortunate. That's it. It could have easily have happened differently. What advice would I give? Well, that was it. I was just lucky.
I have a very simple question about a very specific passage in 12 Years a Slave.
I hate this guy, by the way. Go on, come on.
What did Jasper want to say to Solomon? The scene where they're in the store and he's buying the bag for his wife to go away.
Yes.
Remember, she's going to go away and cook.
Yes.
And Jasper comes in, and you give it, because suddenly we have a point of view shot from Jasper's point of view, and he sees them. And then he goes in the store, but he's been not able to speak before the guy comes in.
Yes.
What was that exchange?
Well, it was interesting in the book, if I can remember correctly, and someone maybe who's read it recently could correct me. He spoke. Sometimes Solomon spoke to slaves, slaves who had masters. Sometimes, and he was in the shop, and they would speak to Solomon about what it is to be free, and you know how slaves would talk to him about them wanting to be free too. And what did he do? And about his family. He would often have conversations with slaves who had masters, and it was a case that was one of those conversations. Well, that's what he would say to him. You know, I want to be free, and what it is to be free and stuff. And and whatnot. A lot of them at a certain time, I think it was, what was it, after 1850 something, if for example, as soon as you got into the north and you were a slave, you could split from your master and you'll be free. So that's when they stopped bringing up slaves from the south. At a certain time in 1850, they stopped bringing slaves up to the south because, at that time slavery was not obviously allowed in the north. Then you could actually split and be free. So that was a conversation. But I didn't obviously let that happen.
Okay, we probably have time for maybe 2 more questions. Steve's done 2 of these already today.
It's okay. One more.
I'm curious about your relationship and how you work with Michael Fassbender, because it seems to me that his work in your films, he goes so much deeper, and he seems to be more interested in exploring all sides of a character, even unlovable sides. And I've seen him in other films, and I never get that sense. I haven't seen that deepness, and you've worked with him in 3 different films, and so I'm just sort of curious about your relationship with him.
Well, I met Michael in an audition for Hunger, and when I first met him, I thought he was, full of shit. I thought he was really kind of cocky. Oh, this cocky bastard. And what happened was that the casting director said, okay, well, listen, we'll bring him back with some other people back. I said, yeah, okay, we bring him back, but bring some others too. And on his second audition, he was amazing. There was a kind of, again, I think at that time I was a bit naive as a director, not knowing that in auditions how much the actors bring into an audition, how much they hold back, because they don't know how much, it's almost like it's a very strange sort of odd thing on audition. And when I met Michael for the second time, that was it. And he at that time he told me a story when we were in the audition that recently he had gone rock climbing, and he was climbing and he nearly fell. He nearly died doing this rock climbing in Ireland, and he thought to himself, well, I don't want to piss my talent up the wall, because I think at that time, Michael was 30 at that time. I mean, he should have been discovered before. But he was doing his own things, And I think I caught him and he caught me at the right time, and that was it. And there was that commitment, there was that thing of trust. And I think when we went through Hunger, when he was on the losing weight regime, there was moments of real vulnerability. There were moments of I had to hold him, And I think through that we went in deep, through that deep sort of start. That was it. That was a starting point. Yeah.
I'm interested in some of the audience reactions that you've heard about 12 years, because you talked a minute ago about the slaves being able to leave the South and go into the North and then be free of their masters, and that kind of geographical move is something that, I guess, put them in a safer space. But when I look at the condition of Black bodies in the world, especially here in the United States, that safe space, there are still spaces that we can't occupy and expect to have security of body in. Have people talked about the parallel between the way people who look like me are treated now versus then? Because the entire time I was watching the movie, I was like, these things still happen today.
For sure, for sure. I mean, that's the reason again, the parallel to sort of even towards the end of the movie when, Solomon doesn't get justice. Or to do with, always, when I see that scene, it's always sort of, it makes me, I shouldn't say laugh, but it's when, when Solomon is, sort of says, my papers. When the guy goes, show me your papers. And I always feel, you have a thing here, was it stop and search here? And then, and we have the same thing in Frisk and something, where they stop and search, show me your papers. It's like, it's a very, there's so many similarities to now of abuse. And it was just, at the time of making it. I mean, look, we've made this movie in this year. Trayvon Martin was killed. 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery, 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. the voting rights been revoked, one has to ask himself, where we've come and where we're going. And again, I'm not an American. I'm English. But at the same time, it reflects in England too, and Britain and Europe too. It's crazy. And again, when I read that 12 Years a Slave for the first time, for me it was like I was reading. I thought, oh, this is like, it's like science fiction, but it actually happened, and is happening. So yeah, Again, we have to move forward, but at the same time, we have not forget our past in order to move forward. That's how it is. And those films about Wall Street and those films, those romantic comedies, they will be made for sure.
I have a question actually too about editing. One has, I'm over here. Hi.
Hi, sorry, apologize. Sorry.
One has to do with translating the book, the memoir, into a cinema. And you said somebody handed me the book and it was a script, but obviously your vision is embedded in the cinema. Mm-hmm. Did you change the point of view? Were there lots of scenes that you took out or added? And then similarly, after you shot it, were there a lot of things that ended up on the editing room floor that might be interesting for us to hear because it talks about your vision as a filmmaker using the story that someone else lived through and wrote as a point of departure, but understanding your vision as an artist?
Well, yeah, I'm not an illustrator, I'm a filmmaker. And I'm not an illustrator, I'm a filmmaker. So it's just, there was a constant process of making. I mean, we shot this movie in 35 days with one camera. So, yeah, people do this, people say all that. But I'm so ignorant, I don't know. I'm fast, apparently. So I'm like, oh shit, I should ask for more money and stuff. Apparently that's impressive. But when you come from London, you have no money. You just get on with it. So they got more than their money's worth anyway. So it's a constant sort of again you write the script, you get the script, and then you sort of edit the script. Even on set, you sort of you tinker with it, you cut, you go back. There's one scene in the movie. There's a couple of scenes, but one scene in the movie that important one I dropped, which I had to drop, which it didn't work. It didn't work. Which was a little bit of a regret, but it's one of those things where it just wasn't working for the film. Yes, I will. Yes, it's actually again, what's so wonderful about this film is that, in fact, 12 Years a Slave is a kind of a feminist movie in a way. The most important characters in the movie are all women, and there was one other woman who was in the film, but it was Celeste. Celeste was a runaway slave who lived in the swamp, who Solomon sort of meets one day when he's out. He has a solitude moment and plays his violin, and it was such a beautiful scene, but it just wasn't. It didn't fit into the movie. It's the first time I'm actually saying this. Actually, I never spoke about this before, but it just wasn't fitting into the movie. It was too many. It's almost like, as we know, there's a lot of characters in the film. It was just one extra. It was the way. It was just. But it was the way. It needed to be like this, and to get it up like this. That needed to be lost. So that was a scene that was taken from within the editing process. But also, even the beginning of the film wasn't like that. That was through the editing. That was through the sort of the balance as such. The scene where we get the guys lined up and say, you all you, da da da. That was because I was doing this sort of I was editing this. This sort of montage of Judge Turner, and I wanted to have a reprieve. And I thought, oh my God, that would be amazing in the front of the film to put make the audience jump into the deep end, throw them into holiday of slavery rather than it be an A, B, C, D. So it's very okay. You're waiting until this guy gets caught and put into slavery, but you throw them in the deep end, and it was just interesting. And you're an editor, aren't you? You're not an editor, but you're a very good question. Anyway, it was just interesting in how you make that the construction of the tale. And again, going on a bit, one last thing was it reminded me of the Brothers Grimm. It reminded me of children's stories. The whole book, because you've got sort of Solomon and you got Hamilton and Brown seducing Solomon into the circus. It's Pinocchio, and then you got the whole construction of it. It's like the darkest fairy tale you can think of, and then it's happy ever after at the end. I mean, that's the best children's stories. I mean, they, you know, the Brothers Grimm, you know, Hansel and Gretel and so forth. Yeah.
Why was it important for you to end with the circumstances of his death?
Yes, you know, there was under pressure for me not to put that in. But it's sad, but it's true. It's sad, but it's true. I mean, you know, couldn't you say that you found, you know, I mean, you know, I said to them, you know, I just said, you know, I said, look, you know, look at Anne Frank. I mean, you know, when you read that book and then in the last page, you shut the book and, you know, you find out that she was, you know, taken to sort of, to Auschwitz, and, you know, possibly starved and gassed. That was the end of her. You know, it sort of makes you think, doesn't it? That, you know, I mean, Solomon, you know, like many black people, you know, where they're buried or where they come from, where it happened to them, we don't know. We don't know. And Solomon was one of them. I think that's extraordinarily powerful that, you know, we don't know when he died or how he died or where. I mean, this is the guy who actually was actively working on the Underground Railroad. So one could well imagine how he died. I'll tell you a funny story. Not even a funny one, I'll tell you a true story. So unfortunately, my dad died about 7 years ago. But one of the last things he told me some story. He, and this is my American sort of story as such. He was working in Florida in the late 50s, early 60s. I mean, they used to get people from the West Indies to pick oranges, you know. So to get these immigrant workers to go out, and they went in these camps to pick oranges in the South. So what happened one day is my dad had these two Jamaican friends. And they said, come on, let's go sneak out, let's go and get a drink. Let's go have a drink. So they snuck out. And they went into some town in Florida. They went in some bar. These two Jamaican guys were walking up with my dad, walked up to the bar. And the guy stood up. So it was like, my dad said it was like a Western people. The doors opened and everyone was like, and walked up, one of the guys, Jamaican guys, walked up to the bar. I said, yeah. Oh, can I get a drink, please? And the guy goes up to me and goes, we don't serve niggers. So the Jamaican guy goes, you don't serve niggers? Then we'll serve ourselves. Took a bottle and boom, on his head. And they ran out. They ran out. And one of them got killed and shot and died. And my dad had to hide in a ditch with the other guy, hide in a ditch. And somehow that night, sort of, they made their way back to the camp. I mean, you know, this was, what, late 60s? Oh, sorry, excuse me, early 60s, late 50s. So, you know, it's that guy, I don't know, what happened to him, I don't know. Should we end now? Or maybe one up, go on, let's go up, as they say. Steve, it's not up.
You don't have to look too far this time. I just want to comment, I think, on the timeliness of your movie. I think that there's some misperceptions in America. We have a black president. There's no more racism in America. I mean, right? There's no more racism. No, of course there is. And I think it's the awareness is coming about, and we've now had, in the last year, really almost 3 movies that deal with the topic of slavery. It was touched upon in Lincoln. It was pushed upon in Django Unchained, but there was that humor aspect of it. And then I think your movie is putting your foot on the pedal and pushing it down and keeping it there the whole movie. And I think it is just probably among the most powerful movies I've ever seen in my life. And if Americans don't realize that we still have racism in America, we're idiots. And we are. I don't know how to, if there's a question.
No, that's a statement. Let's go with that. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good.